case of Ukraine and with the new plan, 28-point plan on the part of the United States, it seems that the government in the United States was happy with somehow somebody published the document, and we know what are the points that have been mentioned in that document. I don't know if it was the United States, Ukrainians, or Russians. But after all, looking at the situation in Ukraine and looking at what Donald Trump is trying to do with Ukraine, he said, I don't know if you saw his point when he was talking. He had a meeting with Mamdani, the new mayor of New York. In the aftermath of that meeting, he was talking about the case of. He was asked by reporters about the case of Ukraine, and he responded. Here is what he said, Carl.
Ask you also about this Ukraine plan.
Yeah.
President Zelensky said today that his country would risk either giving up a partner or giving up its dignity. There's been criticism that this deal...
You mean he doesn't like it?
It's unclear. He was sort of...
Well, he'll have to like it, and if he doesn't like it, then, they should just keep fighting, I guess,
The suggestion that he made, though, was that if he doesn't accept it, that the U.S. would pull back its support for Ukraine.
Well, at some point he's going to have to accept something. He hasn't accepted. You remember right in the Oval Office not so long ago, I said, you don't have the cards. Don't forget, I inherited this war. This war never would have happened. I inherited this war. And I thought he should have made a deal a year ago, 2 years ago. The ultimate deal would have been if it never started. That would have been the good deal. That could have been done too if you had the right president, but you didn't have the right president.
Yeah, I just forgot to say, please subscribe and hit like button, because that helps us to reach more people. Carl, when you look at Donald Trump and the way that he's talking about Ukraine, on one side, we see that the government, the administration in the United States is interested. I would say they want to put an end to the conflict in Ukraine as soon as possible. They don't like the conflict in Ukraine. But on the other hand, on the Russian part, they don't want to see a new Minsk II agreement with the United States. What is your take on that?
Well, first of all, I think we have talked many times about this, and the whole intellectual process that you have with the Donald Trump decision, because again, he wants to save money, he wants to make America great again. Therefore, he doesn't want to get entangled in endless wars that cost a lot of money, that prevent research and development, developing education, infrastructure, and all that in your own country. So I can understand the basic move of getting away from all these endless and extremely expensive wars, both in terms of lives, but also in terms of finance. So this is the first thing, and Donald Trump is a businessman. He wants to restore the power of the U.S. Again, we can argue against or in favor of that. The fact is that it is his policy. That's the first point. The second point is that he doesn't want to leave Ukraine, because obviously the Ukrainian conflict is a conflict that has been triggered, started, initiated, and fed by the US, especially during the Biden administration. And this conflict has become, and I could say under the Biden administration, has become almost a private war between the Biden family and Russia. And there is a point where you don't see exactly what can be reached. There was an idea of weakening Russia. Okay, why not? But once you see that it doesn't work, once you see that all the sanctions you put are doing the exactly opposite effect, why do you continue? That's the second thing. And the Trump realized this, that it's a pointless war at this stage, at least. And the third point is that, and probably Donald Trump realized this, when you had the recent reports of what is going on in Pokrovsk, in Kupiansk, and all that. And he probably understood that the picture that he received from the conflict, from Zelensky and his aides, that you had a discrepancy between the reports on the ground and what Zelensky was saying. Therefore, he probably felt that it was deceived by the Zelensky administration. And in that, he also realized that Ukraine was not on the path of victory, that victory has never been defined seriously by Ukraine, nor by the Europeans, by the way, nor by the US, by the way. And beyond the idea of victory, the idea of defeating Russia has never been defined either, meaning that nobody knows exactly what we want to achieve with this conflict. And what we see on the ground, especially since 1 year, is that the Russians are dominating the battlefield. And again, recently, I mean, a couple of weeks ago, you had the French foreign minister saying, well, Russia is not winning, it's defeated because in 1 year it only achieved to gain 1% of the Ukrainian territory. And that's the vision that we have mostly in the West, that because Russia doesn't win or gain territory, it is therefore losing because the Ukrainians are stronger. But the reality is more subtle than this. Because remember what Vladimir Putin said on the 24th of February 2022. He said, the aim is demilitarization. He added denazification, but demilitarization. Demilitarization, the idea was to have a weaker Ukrainian army, and a weaker Ukrainian army that could not attack or affect or harm the Russian population in Ukraine. Therefore, there had to be some kind of demilitarization. Now, I told you what the French foreign minister said. He said in 1,000 days, the Russian never didn't manage to win more than 1% of Ukrainian territory. If you look at what happened in the 1,000 days, and I counted, I went on a website that is a Ukrainian website that counts, but again, we have to take it extremely with precaution, because it's a count that is partly with algorithms and all that. So I don't take that as a perfect count of Ukrainian casualties, but at least this is something we have. And this website, it's called wartears.org. If you look in the 1,000 last days, Ukrainians have lost more than 600,000 people. Soldiers, I mean. 600,000 killed. Meaning that when you you remember what Putin said, the problem was not territory. It was about destroying a potential. So it's not about the percentage or square kilometers. It's about the number of killed people. We don't know exactly how many Ukrainians have been killed, how many soldiers have been killed. That's the reason why I referred to this website, wartears.org. And again, it is more than 600,000 that have been killed, meaning that, in fact, despite what we think in the West, Russia is winning on the ground, is achieving its objectives. Because at the end of the day, what decides if you win or if you lose, this depends on the objectives you have set at the beginning. If you have set ambitious objectives and you cannot reach them, you can say, well, okay, that was too ambitious. You were not successful. If you had the right objective, you managed to reach it, then you were successful. Period. It's as simple as that. The problem is that the West has never acknowledged the objectives that were set by the Russians, and instead they have defined their own objectives, such as to take over the whole of Ukraine, to replace the government in Kiev by toppling the government and things like this. which objectives that have never been stated by anyone in Russia. So, but these are the Western objectives, so that you can say, well, they didn't reach the objective, therefore they lose, they are loser. The objectives set by the Russians were in fact extremely realistic, tragically realistic, you can say, but realistic. And the fact of the matter is that when you look at the battlefield today, Russia is winning. Therefore, and you have to think about this situation. And the more we wait, the less likely it is that Ukraine will win in some way. Therefore, it's less likely that Russia will be defeated. Therefore, there is a point where you have to make a decision. And in the light of what you want to achieve, if you say, well, we want Russia to be entangled in an endless war, then you continue the war. But if you say, well, we want to preserve Ukraine because we want to defend or protect or whatever, we support Ukraine, therefore there is a point where this conflict must cease. And this is exactly the calculus of the Trump administration. It contradicts the policy of the US up to now, but in fact, this is the most rational decision you can take. And when you talk about this 28-point document that was leaked, and we can probably talk about it later, but if you compare it with the proposal that was made by the Europeans, you can see that there's a huge difference in this. And the difference is that you see that the Europeans are not aiming at reaching an agreement. They continue on the same path they have been. They must confront Russia. And just a couple of days ago, Kaja Kallas, who is the foreign minister of the European Union, or the high representative for foreign action of the European Union, she said Europe has a 2-point plan: defeat Russia and support Ukraine. I mean, point 1 is defeat Russia. Point 2 is support Ukraine. I mean, we all agree that Kaja Kallas is not the brightest light in the shop. Everybody understands that. Nevertheless, that shows exactly the mood in which the Europeans are when it comes to this conflict. This has become extremely emotional. This has always been emotional, by the way. This is strongly driven by, we can even say, Russophobia that you can see in the Baltic states and in Poland. These are the real drivers of the conflict if you look at the European side. And it's probably not a coincidence if Kaja Kallas, who used to be the very unsuccessful prime minister of a country that is one of the smallest of the European Union, is now in charge of the foreign policy of the European Union. She was not able to manage a 1.3 million people country, and now she's not even managing the foreign policy of almost 400 million people in Europe. So we see that the simple fact that we selected or decided to have Kaja Kallas as Foreign Minister of the European Union shows exactly where the European Union is heading to. At no point in this conflict, at no point, the European Union has been able to provide any kind of diplomatic or political solution to the conflict. They didn't even try. And it's very interesting, by the way, because we had this, as I said, the 20-point plan, the American proposal or document that was published end of last week. And yesterday, on Sunday, the Europeans have produced their own plan. But it's interesting, when you look at this plan, they just took the American plan and they just amended the point. meaning that they don't even have their own view on that. They just amended the points that didn't suit them. They just amended on the American document, meaning that they have absolutely no capacity to have their own view on this conflict. They have to take the American view as basis. In addition to that, we have seen recently, especially when we have those different meetings of the so-called coalition of the willing, and you had the meeting, I remember, in London. After the meeting in London, they published a joint statement saying that they welcome active diplomacy. And we're talking about the Americans, obviously, because even though the Europeans welcome active diplomacy to solve the conflict, the Europeans have not activated anything in terms of diplomacy. They have cut all the communication channels with Russia, and they never made any effort whatsoever to restore this channel of communication. I mean, the diplomatic channel of communication. At least what you had just after Donald Trump came into power earlier this year, the first step they started, it was to reinstall a normal diplomatic relationship between the US and Russia, to restore the embassies personnel and all that, to establish kind of a legal framework to reestablish this communication. And based on that, then you had all the discussions we had since then. But first, you have to restore those relationships. The Europeans have not even tried to do that. That means that today, the Europeans are completely cut off of the Russians. And they won't, and that's the interesting point, because after the Trump plan was published or leaked, better said, Europeans said, well, we should be involved in the process. But for what reason? What is exactly the role of European Union? We can say the Americans, for good or bad reasons, they are the mediators in this conflict. I agree this is quite strange, but there is the intellectual explanation for that. Or the Trump administration is saying, well, that was Biden's war, that will be Trump's peace. Okay, fair enough. This is quite strange if you look at US as an entity, and okay, but I can follow the reasoning of Trump saying, well, that was not my war, I didn't want it. And that's exactly what he said, by the way, in the short video you showed. This is not my war, I didn't want it, so no, I can take the role of mediation. Okay, fair enough. And therefore, they are involved in the discussion between Ukrainians and Russians. But what is exactly the role of Europeans? They are not mediator, obviously, and they say they are not involved in a conflict. I mean, they are supporting actively through rhetoric, narrative, finance, military equipment, and so on and so forth. They support, but they say, well, we are not part of the conflict. And now they want to be part of the negotiation. So you see, we are here in some kind of, again, we are beyond a realistic approach from the Europeans. They are completely emotional. They are completely irrational since the very beginning of the conflict. And they are not even able to understand what is at stake in the conflict. And I would even suggest that they deliberately want to ignore what is at stake for both parties in the conflict. They make their war with others. And that's the reason why they would like to have the Americans still involved in Europe, because they prefer the Americans to be involved in the conflict rather than themselves. That's also the reason why they support Ukraine when they say, for instance, that they use Ukraine. And remember, again, Kaya Kallas, what she said just a couple of days ago, again, and I think that was the same day in which she said the previous quotation I made, but the same quote I made. She said It's a good bargain to support Russia. I mean, it's a better bargain to support Ukraine than having a Russian victory. Meaning that it's exactly what Lindsey Graham was saying. It's a good deal to wage war against Russia through Ukraine because we don't spend any American life. We just spend money. That's fine. That's a good bang for the buck. And that's exactly what you have in Europe. I mean, they don't want to get involved themselves, but they would prefer others, the Ukrainians and the US, because the idea is to weaken Russia. They have not the slightest intent to support. I would even say they don't have even respect for the Ukrainian population. They just want to harm Russians. And when you listen to those Baltic states and all that, they talk so much about Ukraine. The most important for them is to weaken Russia. And that's what you can say just looking at the whole process of these two documents. I would say two documents because you have the US plan and the European counter proposal. So that shows exactly the weakness, the intellectual, political, diplomatic weakness of Europe in all that. And I think that should worry people seriously, because they achieve nothing and they are not able to achieve anything. That's the first point. And they don't even understand the situation. They don't even understand they cannot achieve anything with their policy. So again, this is tragic to some extent, because at the end of the day, Ukrainians are paying the price for this.